Welcome. It's episode 144 of Grow Yourself Up. And today I want to talk about the experience of being emotionally neglected in our own childhood and how that can complicate our parenting journey and some of the steps that we can take to help ourselves. So let's just talk first about what I'm talking about when I say emotional neglect. So emotional neglect is when we have not had our emotions tended to, when we haven't had any validation. We haven't been seen, we haven't been heard, we haven't been held emotionally. So we typically have a very flat emotional landscape. We might have very flat affect and we have no kind of connection with our emotional life. So it happens in the our early years when our caregivers are not able to tend to us. So probably up to about the age of 7, when we are either ignored, we're parentified, we're overlooked. So it could be that in a family, some people get more emotional tending than others, and some children are overlooked. We may be treated like adults, so we're not given any kind of help with processing our emotions. We might be used to perform roles within the house, kind of helping roles or parenting other children roles, and not getting any kind of validation or emotional support in return for that. So what results is that we have kind of deficits in our development from an emotional point of view because we've never been tended to. We really need to be. It's not enough to just feed a child. There's a huge thing around helping the brain develop, helping neural pathways develop around, the essence of secure attachment is brain building and being there for children in the relationship in a warm, loving, and attuned way so that their neural pathways build to kind of have this view of the world where they think people will treat me well. I will treat me well. The world is generally good. And when we don't have that, we land up being either anxiously attached or disorganized or avoidantly attached. And these all do change, but it's the experience, this emotional neglect is the experience of the first months and years of our life where we're not welcomed, we're not nurtured, we're not nourished, and we're not seen as being a separate person who needs to have care and love and tending to nurture that relationship. So in an attachment relationship where someone is really nurtured and seen, there's a lot of time actually that's spent and connection that is there to nurture those bonds. And if we don't have our needs met or even noticed, because often what happens is emotional neglect is perpetuated in families because a parent is not aware of their own needs. So if they were ignored as a child, they will tend to ignore their own needs, and then they will, of course, ignore their children's needs because they don't even know that they kind of exist, if that makes sense. And so when we've been emotionally neglected, there is not someone who is there for us to depend on. So, we can't reliably know that one of our parents will be there if we have a tricky time at school, or if we can't do our homework, or if we're having like a big sadness about something, if our pet died, or if we have a friendship issue, or if we're hungry and tired and we are really sad about something. There's not anyone around us to provide that loving, nurturing buffer, because essentially children actually can manage a lot when we have a nurturing, loving adult, because it makes everything better. Like, think about you in your own life as an adult. If you have a loving, nurturing friendship group or a loving, nurturing partner, we can withstand anything then, because there's someone there to put their hand on our back, both literally and metaphorically. And when you grow up in a family where you don't have that, you're kind of by yourself right from the word go. And so it's a very kind of jarring emotional experience. Catherine Stauffer, who I'm going to have back on the podcast, who is an expert in emotional neglect, she says that the main consequence of emotional neglect is developmental deficits, and that the person will be like a child trying to live the life of an adult because they've never learned the skills of an adult, and that they'll be constantly overreaching themselves. And she likens the trauma of being a neglected child to burnout, where you have too much to do and not enough resources. So remember back to the episode on parental burnout, which is childhood trauma is a big risk factor for. So there again, the thing about burnout is there's too much to do and not enough resources. And with emotional neglect, we are constantly, so we've been under-resourced emotionally, and we're constantly, because there's been not enough connection, so we have an insecure attachment, we're constantly trying to get that love in all the ways, because we are, so we overwork, we overgive, we overextend ourselves constantly to try and get what we need. I hope that makes sense. And so from an emotional point of view, we have to start coloring in our landscape when we grow up. So when we're emotionally neglected, we have that feeling, that overriding feeling of being unwanted, ignored, and uncared for, and we have high levels of anxiety. I'm convinced that the high levels of anxiety in our society today are related to the fact that emotional neglect is so endemic in our society, and because it's not abuse that can be seen, because emotional neglect is the things that were omitted. So the research literature talks about acts of omission in emotional neglect, and so we kind of don't know. We kind of just are kind of confused. Stephen Terrell talks about this, is that when we have developmental trauma, we often go to a place of confusion, and we're confused because we don't have the skills that we would derive if we'd grown up being very nurtured and being kind of seen and validated. And so there's the process of really having to grow ourselves up and really getting to know our own emotional landscape. Now, this is a widespread presentation in my kind of clinical experience. And then when we get into parenthood, it can be extremely jarring to experience our children's emotions because our own emotional experience is so flat, and we kind of don't, or there's first of all a lot of anxiety, and then there's this underlying confusion about how am I supposed to be doing this job of life. And if we go back to that idea that the experience of being neglected is akin to burnout, we tend to overgive in all the areas. And so in parenting, we may also try and overgive and kind of overparent with insufficient resources and an internal landscape which doesn't kind of have the capacity to hold the emotions of our children. So we may kind of have to shut our children down, or we may unwittingly or unconsciously do that because we don't have the capacity to hold what is there in the field. And so I wanted to tell you a story about, because this is a very common thing, and this really requires going to therapy to work through and to be able to develop resources so that you can start to not emotionally neglect yourself, and so that you can be present in your relationships with your children and whoever else you're in relationship with. And it can be the experience of one's children's emotions can be so jarring and battering that it feels like they're wrong and that you absolutely have to shut them down. And we kind of have to go through a process of recalibration to understand the normal expression of emotions at different developmental stages. So I wanted to give you an anecdote from my own life about this recently, which really struck me, about how when you haven't had your own emotions tended to, your children's emotions can just be very, very blindsiding. So we went in the holidays, the summer holidays, we went to a lovely playground, and I took my kids there, and we were going to have a picnic with some other friends. And when we got there, and I packed this picnic, and we went. And then very soon after we got there, it started raining. And not that hard rain, but kind of, like rain and drizzle and everything. And we kept on waiting for it to stop, and it didn't stop. And I got quite cold because my back and my arms had got rained on, even though we did stand under like a shade cloth to protect ourselves from the rain, but there was like water dripping through the shade cloth. And I didn't have my girls' rain jackets with me. Normally I always have those in the boot of the car, and I didn't have those. And I was getting really cold, and I just was like, oh, this is a bit miserable. So I said to my girls, okay, what are we going to do? I'm happy to stay here, because there was a period in the summer in the UK where there was like these days of like lots of showers, and then suddenly it would get really sunny and lots of showers again, and then it'll get sunny again. So I was like, there's no point in us going home. We're going to try and really enjoy this day, but it is a little bit miserable to be here, be cold. So I said to them, okay, this is what we're going to do. We're going to go home. I'm going to get my rain jacket. I'm going to get another jersey or like something to put on, another top. And I'm going to get you your rain jackets and a few more clothes so we can enjoy this, and maybe even your waterproof trousers so you can enjoy it, because there was a big sandpit in this place and they love the sandpit still. And we'll come back. And both of my daughters had like a big crying fit. One of them specifically was like crying and shouting, maybe doing a bit of stamping about how disappointed she was. She didn't want to go home. She didn't want to miss this, and da 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 da. And a part of me was going to waver then and think, oh no, should we just stay? I can't bear this, because everyone was looking at me, and I just was like feeling, oh man, this is a lot to hold. But I was like, no, I've got a clear reason. I'm cold in my arms and my back. I want to change, or I want to put on some more clothes. I want to get my own rain jacket, so I can have my own hood, and I want to get you some more clothes so we can just enjoy this. And then if it showers again, it doesn't matter. So I held my ground. I held the boundary. I said, we're going. I promise you we will come back. It's not like I'm trying to escape and lie to you or something and not bring you back. But we are going to go, and then we will come back. And one of my daughters was shouting because she wanted to stay with another mother who was there. I didn't know that well. So I said, no, I'm not just going to like launch you at someone else and leave. And then, because I'll be at least 45 minutes or something. And both of them were crying and shouting. And there's a big part of me sometimes. I mean, I do like holding feelings. I've massively grown my capacity for this. And I know that it's worthwhile. And I also know that I was holding the boundary because this is what I needed to do. But I wanted to let them have their space. But I was really struck by how jarring that would be if I hadn't had kind of practice, and if I didn't have enough capacity in that moment, how I would be absolutely blindsided and really wanting them to shut down. So there was such a big opportunity to scream at them and to drag them out. Not that I can actually drag them out now because they're quite big, but to kind of just scream and march out and then hope that they would follow me. And I did my best to tend to them and to kind of be present for them and to keep on reiterating that I knew this was hard for them, but we were going to be leaving. And in the end, I packed up our stuff and I just walked out. And one of my daughters at the entrance, she was like, I'm so pissed off. And I was like, oh, wow, are we going to start swearing now? And then she said, you're a terrible mother. And I was like, I felt really calm. And I was like, I'm not a terrible mother. We need to do this because I want to get some stuff and I'm cold. And we're going to walk to the car now and we're going to come back. And now that is enough. So I felt like at that point, it was time for me to kind of right-size the reaction. I noticed with my girls, sometimes it get to a point where we could just go on and on and on and on. And I'm really trying to help with calibrating things as well, that we need to learn to right-size our reactions. Like, yes, this is so deeply disappointing. You've had your cry, you've had your stamp, and now we're going to do this and we're going to come back. And so we walked to the car and we got to the car, and then in the car there was some massive disaster as well. What was the disaster? Oh yes, one of them we had packed this lovely lunch, and one of them had pesto pasta in her flask, but the one who likes pesto, in her flask there was no pesto. So basically there was pesto gate on the way home, and she was like shouting and crying, but there was no pesto. I was like, I'm sure that it's just in, because her dad had actually done it that morning. And I said, I'm sure that it's just in the other flask. So just get the other flask. And she got the other flask, and indeed there was her pasta there with the pesto on. So she ate that. And I think actually they had shouted so much because they were both really hungry. But it really struck me how I could have gone into this massive story about there's definitely something wrong here. My children are like, I could have made up a whole lot of stories about their behavior, about age appropriateness, everything, just kind of really run with it. But I chose not to do that because children will continue to have big feelings for quite a long time. And there's a big, and also if there's any neurodivergence involved or sensitivity, they will have bigger feelings and for longer and need more containment and more scaffolding around that. And that's very, very, very jarring when you yourself have been emotionally neglected and you feel really bamboozled by feelings and kind of very unsure about what to do, because the first reaction might just be, I've got to clamp this down. This feels so unfamiliar for me. And this is a nervous system thing. This is not cognitively. You can say to yourself, I need to hold space for this. I need to tend to the emotions, but really you need to be building your capacity from a nervous system point of view to feel safe enough to be present with what is going on. Because from a nervous system point of view, the question is always, what is the threat or where is the threat? And in that time when my children started to have like this big crying and stamping, I could feel that it was coming into me as a threat. And I also knew that I could tend to myself and that I had capacity to kind of neutralize that. And luckily we were kind of walking around the playground. So I was kind of following them a bit because because they were kind of walking away from me actually. And that actually helped metabolize some of the feeling. But I wanted to kind of share this with you, that there's a big part of this where just working on your nervous system will really help you with being present for these normal things that happen in parenting. And this is why working on your nervous system is so important, because you can try and cognitively override what's going on, but you will, if you go into freeze, you're not going to be able to hold space for your children. If you go into your own stress response, so you might go into fight or flight at that point and then scream at them because it feels so dangerous for you. And that may happen a bunch of times before you start to be able to build capacity. Because, of course, when the threat is coming in from your children, you will go into a stress response. We are very much driven by our biology, by our physiology. And so I really want to say to you that if you have this experience of being emotionally neglected, which is very, very widespread, and obviously exists on a continuum, then starting to practice to widen your window of tolerance, to build things into your day to help you have more capacity will be really important if you really want to hold space for your children's feelings, to prevent you from just going into freeze or going into your own rage. Because if you go into your own rage, you will then crowd out your children's feelings. They will learn that their feelings are dangerous because immediately a threat comes from you when their feelings are big. And if you go into freeze, they will also pick that up. Nervous system to nervous system. So we want to be building capacity for us to feel safe enough in our own systems to be able to tolerate and hold space for those emotions, because co-regulation is joining the child where they are and then bringing them back to a place of bringing them kind of out of their stress responses. So I had to match them essentially, not by shouting back, but by being like, I know this was so deeply disappointing. You don't want to leave. You don't want to be leaving this lovely playground. And even though it's raining, you really don't want to leave. And then the containment was the boundary and the affirmation and the attunement. So I'm still being firm about the fact I am cold. I need to go home to get us more things to make this afternoon enjoyable. And I understand it's devastating. And then when we got to the end of it and it had been going on for too long, I was like, right, that's enough now. I'm not going to listen to you telling me I'm a terrible mother. And I understand that you're pissed off, and we're going to go home and we're going to come back. And so you have to trust me. That, because as children get older, you're also growing a relational piece of like guiding them and how to behave. Like they can have all these feelings, and then that's enough now. We've expressed it, and we're going to we're moving forward. We're going to go to the car. We're going to get in the car. We're going to come back. So we now are going to sort of come back down. And so from a nervous system point of view, I wanted to help them see what was going on, to be able to kind of notice in their own systems, okay, we've expressed all our feelings. We're sad. We've had some anger, and we're going to be okay. So I'm going to be talking more about emotional neglect because I think it's really, really important. And it's such a devastating experience in terms of there's so much confusion often in our system. And we have to kind of really widen our own window to sit with ourselves because Peter Levine always talks about, and other somatic teachers talk about, how trauma is too much, too fast, too soon. And when we've been emotionally neglected, everything feels too much, too fast, too soon, our own expression of emotions, and certainly our children's. And the other piece about it is that it's been too much, too fast, too soon, and we've had to deal with it alone. So this is why I think for emotional neglect therapy is really crucial, because you want someone alongside you to help you grow those resources, to help you get to know your own emotional landscape, and to provide enough safety so that there's the too much, too fast, too soon can be titrated and managed, and that you don't have to do it alone. Because that thing about the neglect is you've done so much alone. You've been ignored. You haven't received the care and the love and the holding that you really need. And so trying to do this alone again perpetuates that. So if you're finding your children's expression of emotion really hard to sit with, if you feel like you always want to shut them down, if you feel dissociated for large periods of the day, if you're having a lot of rage, I might suggest that you try and find yourself a lovely therapist to help you with growing the capacity to be with this, and to help you with really coloring in your own emotional landscape, because you also have a whole range of emotions, but you may have learned to just shut those down or repress them or keep them very much under the surface because there was no safety for you as a child. Okay, I hope this has all made sense to you. And there will be more coming about emotional neglect. And remember that this is not your fault. It was not your fault that your parents did not have the capacity to be there for you. It's not your fault if you were parentified, if you were ignored or overlooked, if you were treated like an adult, if you had to parent your other siblings. It's something about your parents' capacity. They may have been having their own, like some sort of physical or mental illness. They might have had a lot of trauma. None of this is your fault. So, because one of the biggest legacies with emotional neglect is shame. So then we tend to think it's everything that we've done wrong. And I really want to reassure you that it's not. And I'm sending you lots and lots of love, because this can be it's a difficult thing to heal from often, because of the acts of omission, we can think, oh, I don't have any trauma. And not that I'm wanting to tell you that you have trauma, but this is a huge, huge thing, when you've had this omitted. Okay, I'm sending you lots of love.